Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss another treble hit of Brexit stupidity as I ask where all the money that we used to give the EU has gone. If we're saving on the membership fees, why hasn't the government taken over the funding of vital projects that used to receive EU funding in the UK? In this case, schemes being used to teach skills to people out of work, which the government haven't bothered to back. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, of all the Brexit lies, possibly we don't necessarily hear enough about the EU-funded projects in towns and cities across the UK, which have now been abandoned by the government. I mean, that EU funding effectively came out of our membership fee. So what's the excuse for the Tories not simply allocating the funding themselves? And it's not like they're claiming they thought the EU projects weren't the best use of the money and they've simply given it to different projects. The same amount of money just isn't there. There's a little bit of like token levelling up funding, which covers a whole lot of things. But the money we used to get is just not there. At the weekend, there was some rejoin events in 37 locations around Britain, doing various things, but with the aim of pointing out some of the things we've lost since we left the EU. I popped along to the event in Sheffield where on the leaflet being handed out, it included the £500 million worth of EU funding that the area had received, which is not now going to be replaced by the Tory government. During the introductory talk, they mentioned some of the projects in Sheffield which will now be hit by that loss of funding. The same will be true all over Britain. But the latest in a litany of broken community projects now being reported as coming to an end are the back to work projects. Now, as I said before, the government could try to argue the toss by saying they disagreed with the EU bodies as to which projects should be given development funding, but for two things. First, if that were the case, the government would have increased the normal development spending in real terms by the amounts the EU had been spending on projects in the UK. This has not occurred. It's not just that local projects are now closing, there are not the new ones springing up to take their place. Second, who is going to argue that back to work schemes are not good use of development funding? Who is going to argue that people struggling for work being taught the skills that are in short supply in their local area is a waste of money? I'm not sure even Lee Anderson can manage that, and he'll say anything for a pie and a pint. And it's incredibly self-defeating. Way back when, the early days of this channel putting out regular content, I was challenged to come up with some possible benefits of Brexit. Oh, you keep going on about all these things that could happen, Phil. What about some of the good things? Balance it out. Don't be so biased. Balance it out. I did used to point to the title of the channel, but I went, okay, all right, fine. I mean, I know the UK, I know the Tories, and I knew enough about Brexit to know that we wouldn't see any benefits. But hypothetical benefits, all right, I'll give it a shot. One of them was a focus on skills training in the absence of a ready supply of skilled workers from the continent. This was early 2019, and the hard Brexit proposed, which wasn't even as hard as the one we got, would have made it more difficult and less desirable for skilled workers from the EU to come to Britain to work. So we will experience an acute skills shortage, I said. With the loss of the ready supply of foreign workers for some of these jobs, the government may like to focus on domestic training programmes. Invest in schools, colleges, other centres which can deliver the skills needed in each area to help boost local economies around the country. That could have been a benefit. It could have been something we could have done in the EU. So it wasn't technically a Brexit benefit, but it could have been, having to focus on it could have been a benefit of sorts. Giving towns and cities the funding needed to develop the skills which could see them prosper. Only Tories are Tories and Brexit is Brexit, so it hasn't happened. And in the case of these formerly EU funded back to work schemes, the Tories can't even be bothered to maintain what measures we used to have in place. So it's not just that they haven't increased our provision, they've actively cut the legs from under it. So let's step back and consider the situation, shall we? So over the past few years, the left behind areas which the Tories cynically targeted with their Brexit promises and levelling up lies have actually fallen further behind the more affluent parts of the country. So the left behind areas are way further behind now. Foreign investment continues to fail to materialise. Investors cite two main problems: a lack of access to customers around Europe and a lack of access to skilled workers for production. We have shafted the access to European customers pretty hard on a sort of permanent basis until we reverse Brexit. But there was nothing in even our extreme Tory Brexit that meant we absolutely had to screw over investors' access to skilled workers, not permanently. The government could have beefed up the education department, gone to town on upskilling those who are struggling for work, or at least decent work. All those shit posters they made about various workers training to learn new skills for a new career. Where is it then? Where's the government investment for it? The EU used to invest in it for the most deprived areas at least. The government could have done so everywhere. Where is it? Nowhere. This should be done by the government in or out of the EU, frankly. But what's all this bollocks from the Tories about helping people into work? Because that's another one of theirs. Whenever they are asked about people struggling with the cost of living, they talk about helping people back into work. It's rubbish, of course. There are millions of people in full-time work who are struggling with the cost of living. What do the Brexit Tories say to that? When someone finally pins them down, says, what about this person? Full-time work, still cannot afford the basic cost of living. What do they say? Well, they should get a better job. All right. That means they need to retrain then, doesn't it? Where do they do that? Where? In England, I should point out the Scottish and Welsh government did not adopt the same brainless approach. These are literally schemes which allowed people to retrain and get better jobs. And they're closing them because, one, we left the EU. Two, the government didn't replace the funding from the membership fees they pretend we are saving. Three, oh, and don't give me any laugh about being given it to the NHS. The NHS are wondering where it is as well. Three, they don't actually care about helping people into work, do they? They just form governments and funnel as much of the nation's assets as they can into their own pockets and those of their shadowy sponsors. Sponsors who are now so shadowy that Sunak banned the media from observing which ones were talking to ministers at their party conference this weekend. That's all they do. Chip off bits of the nation, give it to their mates. They don't care if a full-time care worker can't afford to replace a light bulb in the kitchen. They don't care if children occasionally faint from hunger at school. They don't care that they're causing the life expectancy of some groups to actually decline. In fact, they quite like that because it means they can now shelve the plans to raise the retirement age to 68. But I may talk about that more later this week. But back to these back to work schemes. So I will point out, there was an article in The Guardian about this, and they pointed out that the government had recently allowed councils to spend its so-called levelling up budget on projects like this. But I will have to point out a few things here. First, the government have a £2.6 billion pot to supposedly replace the EU development funding. Now let's break this down. In the last 6 years of EU funding, the UK received £9 billion. The government reckon they're replacing that with £2.6 billion to cover a 3-year period. And this is a later one. So like, even if without taking inflation into account, you think, so we had £9 billion over 6 years. That's like £4.5 billion in a 3-year period. And now they're giving us £2.6 billion in a 3-year period. I mean, if I break it down per year, that's an average of the government saying we should have £0.87 billion a year as opposed to the £1.5 billion a year from the EU. Basically, it's not much more than half. But the thing is, that's without inflation. But inflation is a thing. So in reality, the government are not even replacing half of the EU funding in real terms. Secondly, the government scheme, the Shared Prosperity Fund, they call it, is not even replacing the EU structural funds because it's not focused on where it's most needed. It includes lots of things. It includes projects that the EU may be used to fund, but it also includes lots of other things that used to be funded anyway. Remember, the government didn't never invest in development around the country either. So it's like all the old development funds plus all the EU stuff as well. So the actual amount of money that's replacing the EU funds is actually probably zero. And third, the government originally banned the funds even being used for people and skills until next spring. So what they did is they said, right, 2 years of their 3-year programme, for the first 2 years, you're not allowed to spend it on skills programmes. You can spend it when there's like 1 year left and hardly any money left in the pot. Now ask yourself, now, okay, they've changed their mind on that one recently, but it is the thing has still been going for a year. So that is still projects that's had to close down. But ask yourself this, why would the government ban development funding to be used on people and skills? Like, what possible innocent reason could there be? Other than it doesn't put money in the pockets of their mates. And as I say, changing their mind about it now, that it's come too late. Projects have had to close down. It came too late. I know we keep having to consider that maybe we don't ascribe to malice that which may be explained by incompetence and all that. But as I keep saying, really hard to tell with these Tories. We have a severe labour shortage. We have problems attracting both foreign and domestic investment. Bear in mind, the government literally adopted a policy of advising British businesses to move to the EU after we left the single market. When they complained to the government, oh, how can we access these customers? Just move to the EU. All right then. Brilliant. Lose a load of jobs here. We have a skills shortage. Businesses unable to grow due to, amongst other things, a lack of workers. The Tories say they want to grow the economy, but you need workers for that. You don't need hedge fund managers. You don't need Tory MPs working for mythical Korean businesses. You need workers. And those workers need the skills that match the jobs that are going in their area. It's all very well moaning that unemployed people in the northeast aren't doing the jobs that are going begging in the southeast. Give them the tools to do the jobs where they live. But no, too hard for the Tories, isn't it? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.